the essence, of course, is not injured by that. I note that the bill, like the convention, addresses what we refer to as the mens rea of certain offenses. There's a lot of reference to persons acting knowingly and intentionally. Right? That is a good thing. Because whether a person is corrupt or not, I think ultimately comes down to an exercise of choice. And I think the legislation adequately captures that focus. But as I said, I would like for this not to be just something we pass and move away from. There are things that we need to do in Barbados as far as the manifestation of our seriousness with respect to this bill, or the objects of this bill. Last time I was here, I referred to this concept, cognitive dissonance, where, having described it as a sense of negativity, you can call it guilt, the pricking of a conscience, but a negative emotional state that a person should be in when they are aware that their behavior is inconsistent with their stated ideals. And I spoke then about if a person repeatedly engages in conduct that should cause them to experience cognitive dissonance, eventually it could lead to that individual becoming callous. And out of that callousness, it would become easier to continue to commit wrongdoings. Of course, there's another side of when there's such conduct. And the other side we need to consider is the perspective and the effect that that type of conduct has on persons who observe it happen. It can make them fearful of who they're watching. It can make them resentful. It can make the doers of these undesirable actions lose credibility in the eyes of those who watch them. So it is important, especially when you hold positions of leadership. It is important that we who hold positions of leadership act in a way that is consistent with the ideals outlined in this legislation that we are all, I assume, going to support. But in terms of the success, doing things to increase the level of success in achieving the objects of this legislation, we have to recognize that there are some practical approaches we must embrace. Too often, good ideas, good initiatives, even in the private sector, where profit is placed high on people's priority list, there's implementation problems. We need to be in a position where we can measure the scale or the volume of corrupt practices that we have. We need to assess our systems, the susceptibility of those systems to corruption across specific institutions or sectors, and ensure that as we tweak how we give life to this legislation's objectives, that our inputs are relevant. But perhaps more importantly, we need to analyze the political economy and the social dynamics that drive corruption and impact the prospects of persons choosing to be engaged in corruption. I like the fact that the private sector is touched by this legislation, because as soon as people hear, well, Parliament is debating legislation dealing with corruption, everybody says yes, the corrupt politicians want catching, they want locking up. Nobody disagrees. Well, nobody disagrees. Nobody ought reasonably to disagree. And I think that when persons are in position of leadership and they get involved in corrupt practices, if once you go through the requisite processes and a conviction is safely arrived at, then the sanction of the court should be enforced. In fact, if I were somewhere else, I would say that you should put them in a cell and lock it with an ice key and then walk out in the sun. Now, we have to be mindful of how other persons, other entities who are successful in addressing the issues of corruption in their entities, how they have been able to get some successes. As I said, it touches the private sector, but there are already some private sector entities that are well practiced in avoiding corruption in their business. And they do this perhaps mainly because there are some serious consequences for if they are found to have not been doing their part to fight corruption. We have some really stiff penalties coming from the bill. I think in one instance, a person could be subject to a fine of $1.5 million and or time in jail. But if you look at how the banks, the financial institutions approach fighting corruption, they recognize that not only would their reputations be damaged if they're found to be condoning practicing instances of corruption, but they also want to avoid the hefty fines. And if we are to give ourselves the best chance of achieving a corruption-free Barbados, we have to change the culture within which we do business, within which we practice governance. So, practical things like mandatory training and retraining. In the financial institutions, every year there's a requirement for all employees to refresh their anti-money laundering, know your customer, anti-corruption training. We need to get to the point, perhaps we should be able to easily identify which entities, which ministries, business units are most susceptible and start with them. But we need to show that we are serious about getting people to understand what corruption is, the dangers it presents, and what their individual responsibilities are in eliminating it. Training in the context of employment. Well, that's a condition of employment. You should submit yourself to training. And it should be known that there can be serious employment consequences if persons in the course of their employment do not cooperate with ensuring that they're adequately trained in how to eliminate corruption. Earlier there was reference to providing protection for whistleblowers, people who become aware of unsavory practices and who make the presence, the occurrence of those unsavory practices known. We need to ensure not only that there's adequate protection for people who engage in what we call whistleblowing, but we have to ensure that persons have confidence in those protections that are provided. And there's a lot of focus on what an individual knowingly does with respect to corrupt practices, or what they intentionally do. And in my, going through the legislation, I cannot really remember if I saw a lot of reference to situations that we can term willful blindness, where a person encounters a situation but chooses, as they say, to see and not see. So whereas it is one thing to provide protections for people when they decide to blow the whistle, to say something untoward is happening, you also need to create an environment where it is understood that people have some duty to do just that. Now, if we do these things, what can or should the public expect? Because once we pass this legislation, you put structures in place that says, okay, we in Barbados are serious about stamping out corruption. The public will want to see certain changes in attitude, in conduct. They will be looking to see attitudes and behavior that are consistent with the spirit of the legislation. They'll be looking to be hearing clear, relevant answers that address reasonable questions asked about how public business is conducted in their name. Now, yesterday, I watched a bit of the debate in that other place, and I noted that the Member of Parliament for Christchurch East Central indicated that this matter of corruption has significant consequences for a small democracy seeking to find its way in a challenging global environment. He indicated that every opportunity we can take to raise the good governance of the country is an opportunity we should take. And he went on to indicate that the government has recognized that in the procurement process. There's still work ongoing in that regard. He noted that there's a tenders committee, and that depending on the nature of the procurement, there's a special tenders committee. And he also indicated that government, even in COVID times, has laid contracts in Parliament. These are all statements I was happy to hear. I identify with what the member was saying. And I also identify with an utterance by the Member of Parliament for St. Thomas, when she said that it is not the role of MPs to determine who gets contracts. Now, in recent times, there has been some engagement among the public about an issue which I don't know if to call it a contract or if it was a contract or if it wasn't a contract, but about a sensitive issue involving the sourcing of vaccines to help in our fight against COVID-19. We have companies in Barbados that specialize in pharmaceuticals. We even have companies in Barbados that makes medicine. So that, you know, when I looked at how the bill, and this is not about the specifics of a particular section, a particular clause, it's about the principle. You know that there's a presumption that will be allowable if a person has assets that the possession thereof cannot reasonably be explained by their known income level, then you'll be allowed to make some assumption about how the person attained them. In other words, what I was saying is, if you work for $350 a week, how is it that you can afford to buy a new $400,000 car? It has to make sense. So, I'm hearing that perhaps they got a loan. Yeah? But sometimes, sorry, even small businesses get problems getting loans to buy things for that kind of cost. So small people with small salaries will hardly be able to get a loan for an asset of that value. But it's supposed to make sense, you know. The principle of that section that allows us to make a presumption about a person's involvement in corrupt practices is supposed to make sense. Your known income level is supposed to make sense when we look at the assets you have. Now, as I said, we have companies who are in the pharmaceutical business. We have companies even that makes medicines here in Barbados. I think the public is not unreasonable in expressing curiosity and concern about some of the parties identified as having been involved in the national effort to source medicine. As we take steps further into eliminating corruption from our shores, if we get the public to buy in, public expectations of us will increase. And the questions that they will ask are going to become more uncomfortable. Well, uncomfortable to certain people who make certain decisions about who they do business with. At this early stage, there's an opportunity to nip things in the bud. You know, there's this story that a lot of us might have heard. Something tells me Senator Rogers might be aware of it. There's somebody said the kingdom of heaven is like three servants given different amounts of talents, and the ones that prove themselves good stewards of what they were given more responsibility. Well, the kingdom of corruption can be illustrated thus. You get away with small things, you can go after bigger things. And that is why we need to nip these things in the bud. The same Lord Chief Justice Stewart, to whom I referred earlier, in a seminal case involving Sussex justices, indicated that nothing is to be done which creates even a suspicion that there has been an improper interference with the course of justice. And likewise, sir, and in this regard, nothing should be done which creates even a suspicion that there has been an improper interference with the course of governance. So, with those few words, Mr. President, I reaffirm my support for the legislation, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Hunt. Senator Moe.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, corruption has always been problematic for governments worldwide. Can you ever really stamp out corruption? I don't think so. Can you minimize it? Of course you can. And it's because we know we can minimize corruption that we are all here today looking at this particular piece of legislation. Now, is it easy to detect corruption? I mean, corruption, like anything else, is a situation where at least two people or more get involved in a transaction that's certainly not in keeping with best practices and it's illegal. So it's voluntary. It's not involuntary. You wake up one day and say, well, I'm going to get involved in corruption. You plan it. So is it easy to detect? Is it easy to then prosecute? Or is it easy to then hold people accountable? In my view, Mr. President, it is difficult. Only because those that are well versed in corrupt practices and acts, they have systems, oftentimes quite complex and complicated, that they use in order to hide their criminal behavior. That's well known. When most people who are believed to be corrupt, you know what, they're not prosecuted, they're not held to account. You just hear talk about this one is corrupt, that one is corrupt, but nothing is ever done, only because, like any other type of criminal behavior, they have good and bad criminals, and certainly corrupt individuals, many of them tend to know exactly what they're doing, and they have a methodology that they use in order to ensure that they're not caught. So this legislation gives us guidelines as to what are considered corrupt practices, corrupt behaviors, and it also gives us penalties, so the punitive aspects to the legislation in case we were fortunate enough to get people who are corrupt and to be able to bring them to account. Now, is corrupt practices, because we are here dealing with our particular environment, that of Barbados. So, oftentimes when you look at people's behavior, one has to wonder, are they behaving because they feel that what they're doing is corrupt? Or are they behaving the way in which they behave because they feel that is part of their cultural norm? That's a question you have to ask. Because sometimes people do not feel that what they're doing is necessarily corrupt. Because they may have seen it before, nothing was ever done. They may feel that is a part of the societal norms. And so what they're doing and engaging in, even though it is considered to be illegal and it's corrupt, and certainly under this piece of legislation, for sure, it will be considered corrupt. They may not feel so. Now, this legislation on its own cannot do all that we need it to do. And I know that it was mentioned earlier, certainly that there are other pieces of legislation that will work in tandem with this legislation in order to make people engage in certain practices either accountable, perhaps act as deterrence, but certainly act as a mechanism to be able to mitigate some of that type of behavior. And some of those pieces that were mentioned earlier would have been integrity legislation, certain public finance legislation, as well as money laundering and financing of terrorism legislation, as well as amendments that would have been made to particular aspects of the Companies Act. But, Mr. President, that by itself does not necessarily guarantee that corrupt practices will then disappear from our landscape. It just means that we're doing what is required, and that is to take the requisite steps to ensure that we are able to at least address an issue that has far-reaching consequences for a state, as a small island state like Barbados. But, Mr. President, the category of individuals that I think everywhere are considered to be the most corrupt in the minds of the public, including here in Barbados, are, for sure, politicians. And when I say politicians, I'm not referring to people elected to political office alone, but even people in here, in the Senate, and anybody around politicians, the advisors to politicians, just people within the sphere of politics. And of course, and other as well, people in the sphere of governance. So of course, you'll get public servants and others caught up in a perception by the public. Now, are all politicians corrupt? Of course not. Politicians, like anyone else, are reflective of the society in which they live. They have good and bad in all aspects of our society. You have good lawyers and bad ones, good doctors and bad ones, even people in church. So politicians are no different than the rest of our society. And so when you sit down and you say, oh, I heard someone saying earlier that a person comes into political office, and all of a sudden you see them driving a few weeks later or a few months later in a nice car. Or perhaps they have got through with a loan and they have a nice mortgage and a nice home. But is that corrupt? That's everyday life. That's everyday life. People, as they work, they tend to acquire assets, be it property, be it vehicles, be it whatever. And that's not uncommon. But because they are politicians, right away there's a level of suspicion that goes along with it. And as we sit here, we may say, but why? Now, I've been around politics, I think, for all my life. When I was a very young person growing up, for a short period of time, my father was a politician. A lot of his friends. I've known politicians all across the Caribbean, and I can say without any hesitancy that the majority of people that I know that are involved in politics on any level are not corrupt. But would I sit down here and say there are none that are? Of course not. As I said before, politicians are reflective of the society in which they live. because they're part of that society. I start off, Mr. President, in my comments by saying, oftentimes people engage themselves in behavior that they think is acceptable because within the society that they live, no one seems to care what they do in that regard. And I'll give you some examples that you hear people talking about all the time, and you want to know whether or not it's corrupt. So let's use one first. You have a company, it has government contracts. Perhaps it has directors or shareholders who are involved in companies that have government contracts or government work. So you decide, well, one of the shareholders or directors has a nice vehicle, and they're going to borrow it, drive it all around for months on end, a nice high-end vehicle. And for clarity, when I say a high-end vehicle, and no disrespect to my friends in Warrens, I am speaking about things like a BMW or a Mercedes or something of that ilk. Those would be considered high-end vehicles in Barbados, not a Suzuki. Now, and no disrespect to wonderful cars, Suzukis. In fact, I'm driving one today. But when you are driving around in someone else's vehicle, a high-end vehicle, and the individual whose vehicle you're driving around in, and you have it using as if it is yours, then people right away assume and make these assumptions because they say, well, that company has this government contract worth X amount and it's bringing in X amount of revenue to that individual and the other shareholders and directors of that company. Now, does that happen in our environment? All of us in here sit down, we're all Barbadians, sorry, Mr. President. We're all Barbadians. And it's not just vehicles that we've seen in this country and where people then start to ask questions, but it just seems to nobody, it goes on as a norm. So I have a friend now, and they have government work or government contract, not me per se, Mr. President. This is hypothetical. And they have a lovely beach house. So for months on end, I am using their beach house, but this individual may have shares in a company that has government contracts. So right away there's a suspicion. Why would an individual be staying in someone's home for months on end, and a home or an individual where they may have government contracts? Now, the legislation talks about advantage. It talks about, and for those as old as me, and probably did Latin, quid pro quo. Is there such a thing going on in these circumstances? I'm not saying that there is, because I don't know. But what I'm saying is this type of activity is what causes Barbadians to wonder if the behaviors that people are engaged in are in fact corrupt practices. Yeah, because I mean, if you have your own home, why would you be in someone's house for months on end? It's what people are going to say. Perhaps you're renting. Perhaps you're getting it at a discounted rate. But the minute an individual has government contracts and they have shares in a company that has government contracts, right away that is going to raise some level of suspicion. So you all know of these things that I'm speaking about because over the years we see this. But the best one that I always like, and this has happened over the years, and so often, I don't know how many times I've heard this one. So a person has a company, once again, that has government contracts, Mr. President, and they have a private plane. A private plane. So I said, well, I got to get to New York, or I got to get to Miami or somewhere. But I ain't getting on American or JetBlue. For what? No way. X person has a private plane, they can hop on that and get a ride. No. Mr. President, we all know what the legislation says. All right? I think we got an extremely clear understanding, explanation by Senator Boyce. So for neophytes like myself, who are probably not very well versed in the law, it was welcoming to have such clarity as to what the legislation says. So when I decide, well, I don't think I'm going to hop on that little JetBlue, I'm going to get a little ride. What does it cost to go to the United States, to most gateways, to most cities, Mr. President? On average, about $2,500. Not much more than that, on average. You know, airfare is going up, COVID and all of that. So let's use the high end, the high marker. So $2,500 to get there. So what does it cost if 6 of us go up with $2,500? My math is not the best, but I think it's about $15,000. If 6 people decide to go all at the same time, I get 6 plane tickets. Now, what would it cost me to get a private plane to go to New York with 6 people? Certainly not $15,000. $50,000 could hardly get you anywhere in the Caribbean, much less as far away as New York. Probably closer to $60,000. Now, the fact that you may decide to fly or go on people's private company planes or the planes owned by private individuals who may be shareholders or directors in a company to go somewhere, does that necessarily mean that there's a quid pro quo? Maybe, maybe not. But once people see these type of behaviors, right away, there's a suspicion cast on the behaviors of people in public life. I don't think that there's a single individual in this room, Mr. President, if they're living anywhere in Barbados or have lived in Barbados as long as me, would not understand some of these examples that I'm using. I'm not going to go into all that vaccine talk that I had earlier, because that's been well ventilated. I'm all over this room, well ventilated all over the press. So no one needs to go over that to talk about the fact that you could buy something for $10, but instead you spend $48 on it. So instead of spending $10 million, you spend $48 million. I mean, everybody done read that a million times, Mr. President. I don't need to go over it. I don't need to say it repeatedly. Why? People will make their own judgments. We've even seen legal opinions, Mr. President, in paper from very well-respected, I'm told, attorneys at law who seem to be called to bar in many different jurisdictions. So I do not know what the real analysis of what occurred would be. But what I'm trying to explain in this discourse is that the perception of the public is oftentimes guided by the behaviors of the persons in public office. And that is what sometimes is a reason for the mistrust of people in political life or on the fringes of political life. Now, Mr. President, this piece of legislation, and I must say right here and up front, I am in favor of it. I believe any legislation that comes here to this chamber that deals with corruption, integrity in public life, in anything at all that is going to constitute a behavior that we as Barbadians would want to see in this country, I am in support of it. When Senator Boyce spoke earlier, Mr. President, and he said that Barbados scored low on Transparency International's index, I think we were number 27, 29. But that's great. And they want to keep it there. He did make some comments as to some of the rationalizations behind that particular score. I wouldn't belabor it. It's all there. We all heard it. But what is important is that regardless of the rationalization, we would want to keep it there. So I would suggest that when we continue to discuss this legislation, when we continue to even try to get people to understand it, we also let them understand that the perception of some of our own behaviors is what is predicating some of the mistrust that we see when it comes to thoughts of corruption in public office. Now, besides this piece of legislation, which clearly defines what corruption is, It also has punitive clauses in it that will assist in cases where people are found to be corrupt or be prosecuted. So then there are remedies available. However, I also feel that there's something missing from this. There's something missing from all the other legislation, the suite of legislation coming that has come already that will help to bolster this legislation, and that is transparency. Transparency is an important factor when we speak about corruption. People must have a confidence, not just that you come in and pass legislation. Passing legislation, in the case for most people, is nothing more than window dressing, unless you have confidence in it. Because you want to hear no more about no vaccines and about no private planes and beach houses and motor vehicles and all that stuff. What we want is transparency. And how do we achieve that? We achieve transparency, sir, by having legislation that makes the actions of government, not just government, but the administration of governance by those entrusted by the people of this country to do so. And what is that? Freedom of Information legislation, FOI. Long overdue. You cannot have legislation talking about corruption and integrity and all of that without the transparency component. Why is it a secret? So I tired of all everybody else, Mr. President, of all the rumors and the this and the that. What we want to know are the facts. And FOI gives you those facts. It tells you who has the government contracts. It tells you who bid on the contracts. And it will also tell you as well where government is in regard to certain administrative factors. So I would say to you, Mr. President, as much as I'm in support of this legislation, I think that without a key component like freedom of information that gives you that transparency aspect, the legislation will always then just be another piece of legislation in the eyes of the population and the citizens of this country. Now, why am I so much on freedom of information? We've seen it in many other jurisdictions. And we've seen the effect it has had on the behaviors of people, on the trust people have in the governance structures, and the like. This is nothing new. This is actually something that we promised. It's actually in the manifesto of the 2018 election, FOI, Freedom of Information. And I would suggest that as we look at this and other pieces of legislation of similar ilk, that we ensure that this type of legislation is also pursued with some level of alacrity, because we do need transparency. You know, the most dangerous thing for government and governance when it comes to talking about corruption, sir, is when it is rumor that becomes the basis of your decision. When rumor is what makes people behave in a particular manner and not fact. Fact is important. Yeah? Some people say, oh, well, I saw it in the newspaper, or I heard it on the radio, or whatever it is, wherever they saw it. I saw it on Twitter. Wherever they saw it, does it make it factual? No. That doesn't make it factual because you saw it on Twitter. Is it factual? I heard one of my senators in here say today that they got a correspondence and somebody sent them X. Someone sending you something, sir, doesn't necessarily make it factual. It just means someone sent you something. You understand? If someone sent you something was factual all the time, or what you read in the newspaper or heard on the radio or whatever, or saw on Twitter or wherever you get your news from was factual, I don't think there's a single lawyer that will be making any money from defamation. But they do. Why? Because people put up all kind of rubbish. That's not true. And ends up perhaps defaming an individual, which then clearly shows the point I'm making, that just receiving something by itself doesn't make it true. But what we know with most models, because there are different models, and I know, Mr. Speaker, there are other people in here who wish to speak, and I try my best to keep my presentations concise. But most models of freedom of information legislation, FOI, what we do know, it gives you access to things like the truth, government contracts, government expenditures, government administration, all types of things. There are only a few occasions where it's not available to you in most models. I mean, things like national security. So a piece of legislation, it might be something that maybe have national security implications, which we could all understand why you don't have access to it, certainly not at that point in time. You may get access to it 10 years later, but certainly not then. Then, of course, there are instances where something is still at a negotiation stage, and so therefore you're not able to access the information. You certainly would not want to in any way influence that negotiation, which may be at a critical stage. I could go on, but the reality is this type of legislation that we have been discussing here today, and others that have come before, and others that will come, in my view, Mr. President, without FOI, we are lacking the transparency component that gives people the certainty of the trust that the public will then have in what is then presented to them. Yeah? Now, Mr. President, I only have one other point to make on this subject, and that is for many years, you hear these, and that's why rumors are always not good. People say all kind of things to you. I remember prior to the government winning in 2018, we heard all sorts of things about all kinds of people, said by some of my own colleagues. Yeah. Now, I believe myself, Mr. President, to be a sensible individual. And I don't, so, and discerning. And so I think I'm able to imbibe information and make a relatively qualified judgment on the veracity as well as the confidence that I would have in information given to me. One of the reasons why I believe that anything that is transparent that could help this legislation is so important is because I think that we need in a small society to stop maligning people, just maligning people without fact. I heard Senator Greenidge, and he spoke about the remedies that are available for that. But truly in a place that's 166 square miles, when you continue to malign people, is a monetary remedy really going to restore their reputation? Is it really? Probably not. You know, when you live in large jurisdictions, you're able to remake yourself and rebuild your reputation and all of that, but not in small societies. It becomes extremely difficult. And that's why even something as similar something as simple, Mr. President, something as simple as making an allegation of corruption or any spurious remarks about corruption involving an individual can sometimes have long-lasting effects, not just on their reputation, but on that and but on their families and all that as well. So we as people who assist or who pass legislation, I should say, need to be cognizant that what we do has effects on individuals. It's not being made in a vacuum where there's no one being affected. Yeah? And things that we say, even in here, you know, sometimes I hear people make comments in here, and I'm just like surprised. Because, you know, at the end of the day, we have to remember that, yeah, you may have some level of protection here, but what about the person that you are speaking about who is not present and who does not have the ability to respond? So, basically, Mr. President, what I'm saying is, as important as this legislation is, and it is an important piece of legislation, it does need some other assistance in order for it to be effective. And I did say it was going to be my last comments, Mr. President, but I do have one more. And that is, corruption has long-lasting effects on all societies, and it does. Now, earlier in my remarks, sir, I said that all of us, and when I say us, I'm talking about senators, elected officials, people who work in government, people have a perception of you. Our own behaviors are what then sometimes influences others in society as to what is correct and what is the norm. You know, besides Barbados being low in the on Transparency International's index, Barbados has always had a reputation for good governance, for structures, for processes, and for procedures. All over the Caribbean, and I've worked in several countries, they say that about Barbados and about Barbadians, that their structures and their processes are renowned, as they may not be perfect, but they tend to be adequate, and most people believe that they are usually well done. And I think that we need to also continue that as well, and that our processes and procedures, including in this chamber, has to be such where we remember that there are other generations to come after us. And it doesn't make sense to denigrate or lower your standards. Why would you want to do that? Your standards must be maintained as much as possible. And if those that are present don't maintain it, then who is going to do it? The generation that you're now teaching something different to? I think not. So that, too, is a point I would like to make as to what transpires in here oftentimes. And I believe that we need to also be cognizant of that. So in closing, Mr. President, I would like to say, yes, I support this legislation. I am still saying this legislation without FOI, without freedom of information, it does not then give you that transparency aspect that is required. And of course, Mr. President, I will also say that all of us, and when I say that, I'm speaking about people within the sphere of politics. But once you are a senator, you are a politically exposed person in the sphere of politics, have to be cognizant that our own behaviors are what make people sometimes believe or perceive something that may not be accurate. And with that, Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Moore. Senator Reverend Dr. Rogers. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for affording me the opportunity to speak on this Prevention of Corruption bill. I wish to preface my very short presentation with just a thought that ran through my mind. Corruption is to the social fabric of a society what a malignant cancer is to the human body. Corruption is to the social fabric of a society what a malignant cancer is to the human body. As I sat and listened to the presentations today, I've been very impressed by the high level of discourse and the great thought that went into this particular bill by each speaker that would have presented thus far. I think it is incumbent upon me to speak, sir, because in my profession, in another place, I would speak much against corruption. I wish to thank the senators who spoke before, particularly Senator Boyce, who asked some probing questions about who are we? Who are we really? What is the Barbadian? What drives us? Are we prepared to have a conversation about corruption, he asked. And then he made a statement that I would have made some time before, that we cannot legislate morality. I also wish to highlight what Senator Franklin, Senator Hunt, and Senator Greenidge would have dealt with as well. And Senator Greenidge spoke specifically to what we've been hearing time and time again. As administrations change, somebody has to get locked up. Somebody is going down for this. But then, alas, he said, where is the evidence? Where is the proof? And Senator Moe, I wish to hear you even more often in the Senate now. I enjoyed that presentation just now. And you raised some very interesting points as well. You raised a point about perception versus reality. And all of this is enshrined in the bill. In the part of the schedule which covers the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, Article 8 in particular points us to a particular place that goes beyond the legislation. Article 8, subsections 1 and 2 say, in order to fight corruption, each state party shall promote, inter alia, integrity, honesty, and responsibility among its public officials in accordance with the fundamental principles of its legal system. Number 2, it says, in particular, each state party shall endeavor to apply within its own institutional legal system codes or standards of conduct for the correct, honorable, and proper performance of public functions. So I believe this speaks to something that I've spoken about in this chamber before, civics. The whole understanding of what my part is in the fabric of the state and the development of the state. What is my role and how do I play this role for the betterment of the state? When I listened today to Senator Greenidge, and he raised the points about where is the proof. And he said, because sometimes there are no checks. There's nothing to show that anything happened. It led me to a calypso by Trinidadian calypsonian Dr. Hollis Liverpool, the mighty Chalkdust, simply entitled The Mailman, where Chalkdust described himself as a mailman. And he said, you know, as a mailman carrying out the people's mail, you get to see the reactions of people when they receive the mail, but sometimes the package is not closed properly, and you get to see what's in it. And the hook line of that song was, money pass, money pass. So as he pointed out the ills in his society, he simply said, that happened because money pass. And so, Senator Greenidge, if you do not see any check stubs or anything, perhaps the mailman could tell you what happened. Money pass. Senator Moore raised some concerns about perception versus reality. And she said that she has had enough of the vaccine talk. I think that most people have. I wish to commend the MP for St. Philip North, Dr. Brown, for trying to at least add something to the debate when she spoke about the cost of dose versus the cost of vials, and vials contain X amount of doses. That will help. And also, we heard that Minister Strawn also sought to give some clarity. But you see, perception is greater than reality. And so let me just paint a picture similar to what Senator Moore painted about the aircraft and so on. 24 million, 3 million. 3 countries involved. Some companies with some dubious names. And no track record. Suppose someone was to suppose that the excess or the profit from the purchase of these commodities would fall into the hand of an entity who will then, through the mailman, pass them back to a political entity in preparation for election. This perception is greater than reality. And 2 of the countries have had elections, and the party in power lost miserably. Somebody will say the boat ain't coming. The train just didn't come on time. You see, perception, sir. Perception versus reality. And somebody may be asking if the train will get in time for the 3rd one. So I've just raised this to show how Article 8 here speaks to the point that you could write all the legislation in the world. If people do not have the heart, if people do not have the commitment to nation and national development, legislation will always have loopholes. And people will always find them. So I'm still saying that perhaps there needs to be a great explanation about what has happened, just for clarity, just to help the minds of people so that we would not have to rely on perception. Because if you rely on perception, it can go to some very dark places, Mr. President. I was particularly thrilled by the debate on this bill in the House. And permit me, Senator Moore, to mention vaccines, but not how you want me to mention. You see, sir, I wish to commend the scientists who worked on the AstraZeneca vaccine and the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine and the Sinopharm vaccine, the ones that we've had here. They've done some brilliant work. And I think that there are some positive things about those vaccines that we do not know yet. And Barbados may be a good case study. Not a case study as suggested in another place by someone else. Something. But Barbados may be a good case study for these vaccines because I see a positive side effect coming from them. Because since these vaccines landed here in February this year, all of a sudden politicians have gotten honest. People gained a conscience. All of a sudden I can hear things in Parliament last week that I hadn't heard before. And we are 3 years into an administration. I believe it's the vaccine, sir. I believe that there's a side effect. When I took mine, they told you, there were people saying you'll grow tails and things. I didn't sleep the night because I was waiting to see what happened. But coming out of Parliament last week, and the criticisms we've heard coming from the leader of the opposition and the member from St. Andrew, it said a lot. It said a lot. Granted, I think that it's more Family Feud that could possibly take place better in Roebuck Street, but it was good that it came on the floor of Parliament. Because it gave us a little glimpse into the inner machinations of political entities in this country. And it really says to us that if we want to influence the next generation of young people, we have to do better than this. We have to do better than this. I know the cut and thrust of politics. I know how it works. I've said before that I believe that most politicians enter politics to do good for the people. I have every conviction that that is what happens. But if we have a system where in order to help the people, you have to get help from somewhere else so that you can help the people and make sure you help that other place where you got the things from, we've created a problem. So I've always asked the question, are politicians corrupt, or are politicians corrupted by a system of corruption? I think we have a good opportunity in the passage of this legislation to make a difference. We have committed ourselves. We just voted on a constitutional amendment to become a republic on November 30th, symbolically cutting all ties with our colonial past, threading out into the high waters on our own. We must endeavor to be better than this. And I join with Senator Moe and to say that it begins with us here, right in this chamber. We are the ones who have been given a privilege, just for a short time, a brief fleeting moment, to participate in the life and development of this great nation. I believe that we must leave here with not only our reputations, but the reputation of this honorable chamber even better than we met it. In order to do that, sir, Article 8 of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption is important. There must be the promotion of integrity, honesty, and responsibility amongst our public officials. We cannot look back and say, but when you look back in the other days, those guys did this. I've often quoted the words of Johann Henry Wichern, the leader of the Inner Mission, when he took over the Inner Mission for the Church of Germany. He stood in 1842 in Wittenberg on the grave of Martin Luther, the great reformer, who had died about 300 years ago. And he said, if we do as our fathers did, we will not do as our fathers did. If we do as our fathers did, we will not do as our fathers did. There must be a change. There must be a transformation. This legislation provides a framework for us. It challenges each one of us who has been called to these positions of leadership in this country to recognize that Barbados facing the 21st century cannot operate as business as usual. We cannot operate as we did in the past. The ethos of this society now rests in our hands. What it will be perceived as to the world is in our hands. When we come into public life, let us try to leave as squeaky clean as we came. There will always be temptations, sir. There will always be someone whispering in our ears. There will always be a mailman turning up. Money pass. But we have to have that integrity, that honesty, and that responsibility to recognize that what we are doing here is not for ourselves, but generations to come. I had promised not to speak about this, sir, but I will nonetheless, since we're dealing with this bill. On the 5th of August 2020, the integrity legislation failed in this House, in this chamber. I don't know why it failed, sir, because most of us who spoke to it had supported it. But the 5th of August was a strange day in this House. We were in the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic that many of us did not know much about, and we still do not know much about. I know, in speaking to some of my members on the independent side, that some of them are very scared. Some of them have health challenges. And on that day, the Chief Medical Officer, Acton, had given permission to one of our senators to return to the Senate, who had been in quarantine. When I came to this Senate, sir, in December of 2018, I met one of the most cohesive units of people on all sides of this chamber. I met people that hugged each other when they got here in the morning and chatted. That day changed a lot of things. And the reality is that there's no blame to go around. The Chief Medical Officer issued a statement. He's the Chief Medical Officer of Barbados. But the colleagues on this side also had a great fear. And I supported them in leaving this chamber. I myself did not leave, sir, because in my profession, I have people to look after, and I have to tell them to follow the advice of the medical officials. I did not leave, sir, because I do not attend the doctor regularly, so I do not know of any comorbidities that I have. I can admit that too. All you have to do is don't go to the doctor and you're good. And so I decided to stay in the chamber, sir, as was my call. And after supporting the integrity legislation in my speech, sir, I could not vote for it when it came to the floor. Because when it came to the floor, I was not voting for the integrity legislation anymore. I'd have to have been voting for my own integrity. Because it was a bill that needed 14 votes to pass. There were only 12 members in the House. I understand the cut and thrust of politics, sir. But I believe that there are some things that go above that. And if we're going to function at the highest level in this chamber, Do not expect me to throw my fellow members under the bus. I expect that when we come here, we're doing the business of the people of Barbados, and we do it to the best of our abilities. We do it with the highest level of integrity, honesty, and responsibility. This Prevention of Corruption bill challenges us all to think about the opportunity that has been given us here, to think about the call that we have, that just for a brief moment, we've been given the golden opportunity to chart the course of what is one of the greatest nations in the world. We cannot afford to waste any of that time tinkering around with things that have nothing to do with the lives and livelihoods of our people. So, sir, I will close how I started. Corruption is to the fabric of a society what a malignant cancer is to the human body. With those words, sir, I fully support this bill, and I thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Rogers. Senator Mr. Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I too support this bill. However, Mr. President, I'm reminded by a document which I continue to read, which I made a document of the House about a political campaign in which a broom was used as a symbol of what was supposed to happen in the future. And this legislation, Mr. President, seems to be attempting to use a broom to sweep all out through the door. Mr. President, sweeping corruption away is not an easy task. And it can't be done as a one-off job. It requires cultural change. We can legislate all that we wish, Mr. President, and we can lay out all the penalties. Corruption is endemic, and we have to start, Mr. President, at the bottom and work our way up. You will not change people who are entrenched. They will only dodge and hide and continue. So we have to remember, Mr. President, changes like this have to start from the little ones. Mr. President, I am not going to be long, and I wish to make a couple comments about this legislation. The definition of corruption within this bill, Mr. President, is long and extensive. But I am a bit concerned, Mr. President, as a practicing doctor, about a particular section. And that, Mr. President, is section 4 in part 2. And it seems very broad. Now, Mr. President, for many years there have been accusations of members of the public not accessing adequate and timely care in the public sector, and are then forced to access the same care in the private sector, often in the same institution. And I say accusations because, as Senator Grinney says, there has to be proof. And as far as I'm aware, I have not heard or seen any cases that were proven. Mr. President, this particular clause seems to open some professionals to serious accusations of bribery. And I can well create a scenario where you might well, as a senior person in the hospital, see a patient who then opts to seek care elsewhere, or if you are a lone specialist in a subspecialty where there's no one else, you might end up providing that care in a different institution because of long waiting times, and especially in these times where access to facilities are restricted, and one could be accused of corruption. I'm neither defending, Mr. President, any position or accusing anyone. I'm just laying out a scenario. But it's a serious one. And the penalties as laid out in this legislation are severe because they're not just monetary. They include potential jail time. And as we all know, doctors are governed by a serious set of legislations, and we do have a medical council, and one could easily see one's name being removed from the register. So I say this as a caution because it is easy in an effort to facilitate patients to end up on the wrong side. Mr. President, but I want to speak about the concept of whistleblowing. And while Senator Greenidge this morning spoke of the burden of proof, I have serious concerns that if we do not have urgent legislation passed to protect the whistleblowers, there will be no change. In Article 32 of the schedule, it lays out some, let me say, some clearly stated positions for states to protect witnesses. And Mr. President, it goes as far as suggesting that relatives and other persons close to them should have the same level of protection. So while as a whistleblower, you might be protected as a single person, you might find your relatives unable to get unemployment if the person or the defendant whom you spoke about has enough influence. But it also speaks, Mr. President, in Clause 3 to even more serious conditions where countries might need to consider placing witnesses in witness protection programs. So one will only place a person in the witness protection program if you fear for their life. And I call upon all of us to consider that while we wish to put legislation in place to stamp out corruption, persons are likely to face retaliatory behavior. And we must consider that some can be extreme. And therefore, it is important that if we are going forward with legislation that will stamp out corruption, we have to simultaneously and swiftly put in place the appropriate protection for those persons who will come forward to help with that fight. Now, Mr. President, I want to raise a matter on this floor, and if I in any way breaching regulations, you may stop me. Mr. President, we have been given the privilege as members of this chamber excuse me, to pass legislation which govern all persons in this country. And the supreme law of this land, which is the Constitution, is from time to time amended in this chamber and in the lower house, of course. And Mr. President, when we sit in this chamber and we amend the Constitution and we make amendments that specifically relate to us who may be temporary, specifically relate to us as members of both houses, we must be mindful that we have to live by those rules. And I want to refer to the recently passed constitutional amendment in Section 35 and Clause 7. Because Clause 7, Mr. President, speaks to how we are obligated to behave. And I saw, Mr. President, last week where for the first time that legislation was being used, as a chamber, we appear to have forgotten about it. Because Clause 7, Mr. President, spoke to the manner of voting. And there was a clear incident on the internet where a ballot appeared on the internet. As a senator, Mr. President, I felt embarrassed by it. I felt embarrassed because, Mr. President, we sat in this chamber and we passed the legislation. We all read it and we debated it. But when it came time for us to use it, we disobeyed it. Mr. President, that's a serious example of doing what I say, but not what I do. And if this chamber, Mr. President, is going to have the respect of everyone and all chambers of Parliament, we have to make sure, Mr. President, that that type of thing does not happen again. Mr. President, there are rules in the standing orders that speak to how we must behave, what we're allowed to do during the Senate in session. And while the language may be a little bit antiquated because it doesn't refer to current electronic devices, we have to have an understanding that there's some things that we cannot do while the Senate is in session. It is fine for anyone to watch on YouTube and see Barbados Senate live, but it is not right for senators to be broadcasting live from their phones what is happening in the chamber, particularly in a secret ballot, Mr. President. And with those few words, Mr. President, I close and I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Mr. Miller. Senator Sands.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to lend my voice in support of this bill because it would be remiss of me not to add my voice to such a bill as important as this. Corruption has been discussed throughout the width and breadth of this country for years. Before I was born, and after I'm here. You can have conversations, you would hear conversations about corruption in the schoolyards, corporate boardrooms, rum shops, offices, social media, and right here in Parliament. So conversations and topics surrounding corruption is not novel to a specific class of person or type of person. It is a topic that engages the attention of every single person in Barbados. The average Barbadian is interested in the conversation surrounding corruption. And why is that? The reason that corruption is so important to most is because of the effects that corruption has on society. Now, the Barbados Labour Party in their manifesto at page 11 indicated that corruption, and it quite appropriately dealt with the essence of what corruption is. Essentially, corruption is a stain on society, a drain on the economy, and it reduces government revenue. Now, what is that in practical terms? Average persons in those conversations that I highlighted earlier would have a surface level conversation suggesting that corruption is limited to the transfer of money in exchange for a favor. That is the surface level of what corruption is. But what this bill seeks to do is to open the definition of what corruption is. Because the reality is corruption is not just limited to the passing of money. Corruption is so much more. And Senator Boyce and the other senators that spoke before me quite eloquently addressed the definition of what corruption is and the scope. The scope of this bill now extends beyond the public sector. So conversations within public domain where the same politicians are all corrupt, corruption is synonymous with a politician. The reality is corruption does not only exist in the public sector. It exists in the private sector. An example, I want to borrow money from a bank. I might not be qualified to borrow money from the bank, but I know somebody inside the bank. I might be able to give that person something in exchange for a loan that I otherwise not have been qualified for. That is private sector corruption. This bill now extends the scope of corruption to encapsulate all forms of corruption in both sectors, public and private. And for that, I think the government should be commended because the government has not put on narrow blinkers and focused specifically on one aspect of corruption, but it has cast a wide net to try to encapsulate everything for which the essence of corruption entails. Now, most of the honorable senators this afternoon and this morning have addressed the majority of this bill in its entirety. They've addressed the definitions of corruption, they've addressed the scope of corruption, they've addressed the effects of corruption. So what I intend to do in my short contribution is specifically focus on the investigation aspect of this bill as well as the evidentiary aspect of this bill, because those are equally important if you're actually serious about preventing and prosecuting persons involved in acts of corruption. Now, Senator Maynard correctly stated that Barbadians, yes, we can pass law. And I think it was Senator Rogers that indicated that you can't legislate morality. Both of these I agree with. But what we can do, because we can't control the behaviors of people, and it takes years and years and years to shape a culture towards a positive direction. So in the interim, in the short term, what we can do is implement a legislation that specifically addresses the issue in such a way that it tells person, if you're willing to do this action, this is the consequence for your action. That's only the first step. But we're taking it to the next step. Even if we can identify acts of corruption, this bill is now providing investigative officers with the powers to actually investigate. Because prior to this bill, we would be aware of persons, and I know many persons in this honorable chamber have heard persons talk about, well, you know, so-and-so has been involved in this corruption, and this body's been involved in this corruption. A lot of idle talk. Some of them not so idle. Persons may actually have valid information. And that's why I also agree that legislation like the whistleblower legislation would equally be important to help add needed protection towards the suite of legislation as it relates to corruption. But as it stands, the whistleblower legislation is not yet enacted. So we're working with what we have. So when we have instances now where we have the investigative officers who now have the powers to pursue information that they think would have substantial value to assist them with their investigation into corruption, that is an important tool. Before this legislation, investigation officers could not go and demand the information from a person. I could only ask. And you can either comply or don't comply. But provisions in this bill now say that once there is reasonable grounds to suspect that a person has information that is of substantial value to assist that investigating officer with their pursuit of corruption, they can go before a judge in chambers. They can present their case to the judge and be granted what is now called in this bill disclosure orders. And essentially what a disclosure order will do is state to the person who they suspect have the information to either answer questions in relation to the information the investigating officer wants, provide the said information, or provide documents. So you can't just say you have the information now. The disclosure orders will now compel you to share such information with the investigative officer. The bill also goes a step further by saying that even if we ask you for information and you choose not to provide such information, you can potentially be committing an offense. So, while the legislation for whistleblower is fine and dandy, and yes, I agree with Senator Maida, we need that. In the interim, should this bill be passed today, well, when this bill is passed today and be implemented in law, the investigating officers can actually get boots on the ground and start pursuing trails, start following leads, investigating acts of corruption, and actually ask or mandate that persons give them the information that is vital to assist them with their investigations. That is indeed an important tool. So this is more than just ink on paper. This is more than just saying we are against corruption. This is actually granting persons the tools needed to investigate the acts of corruption and hopefully bring persons before the court to be prosecuted for the suspected acts of corruption. The bill also has provisions in place that in the event, because with the disclosure orders as it stands, you actually have to give the suspected person notice of the disclosure order. So in other words, that person is now aware that you are of the view that they have information that you want. In instances where it might not be prudent to allow a person to receive notice that you are actively following on leads that suggest that they may have vital information to assist with your investigation, the same investigative officers now can go to the same judge in chambers and ask for search and seizure warrants. What that means now is that those investigative officers can now go without notice, without giving you a heads up, if they suspect, because there are elements that are outlined within the bill that indicates what are the requirements that need to be made out in order for a judge to grant this search and seizure warrant. But should it be granted once the judge is satisfied, I don't have to come and ask you for the information. The investigative officers can now go and seize the vital search and seize the vital information that is indeed pivotal and of substantial value to their investigations. Two major tools that are assisting with the investigative aspect of acts of corruption in this bill. The bill also deals with provision of tipping off, because this is a small society that we live in. Everybody's somebody's friend or knows somebody's cousin. Very small in society. So in the event that the investigative officers are hot on the trail of a person, somebody's cousin might decide to say, well, Susan or Suzette, you know that the investigative officers have suspicions to believe that you're involved in something, or have suspicions to believe you might be holding something, or that person might simply just discard information to prejudice the investigation. Acts like that are no offenses within this bill. And there are stiff penalties, potentially imprisonment, should you be found guilty of these offenses. So this bill is doing more than just outlining what the offenses are. this bill is also giving the persons who will be operating within this bill the tools, the necessary tools needed to do active work towards the prevention of corruption, the investigation of corruption, and the prosecution of corruption. That is a significant aspect of this bill that needs to be understood. Now, Mr. President, in respect to the evidence that will be needed during the investigation of corruption, the bill has made provisions at clause, where does it, Mr. President? At clause 17, where the bill states clearly, if a person has property in their possession that they cannot give a proper account, they can't declare, they are unable to say how they get it. So when they compare your income, let's say it was 5,000, 10,000, let's use a minister. Let's say it was in the average of $10,000 to $16,000 a month. Pardon? $15,000 a month. And at the time of the alleged accusation of corruption, you have in your possession a property that grossly exceeds what we would reasonably suspect you to be able to acquire from your source of funds. That property can now be used against you to corroborate the suggestion of you having received or given an advantage as it relates to the acts of corruption. So, in other words, by simply having the property in your possession, while you may not be able to give an account for it, in pursuing an investigation and prosecution of you for corruption, the investigators can now use that property that seems to have appeared from nowhere against you to further assist them in their prosecution of persons with, in relation to aspects of corruption. The bill also makes provisions for the presumption of corruption. Now, I think that's clause 18, but this is specifically limited to two types of corruption. The bill provides that it is limited to clauses 8.1 and 8.2, where the bill says that presumption applies only to bribery in relation to contracts and bribery of persons in public functions. So in these two particular categories of persons where the bill outlines what the bribery offenses are, those two types of persons, there is a presumption that if you have in your possession some form of property, or it is proved that the advantage was given in some form of inducement, you are presumed to have committed act of corruption. It essentially shifts the burden of proof. On the balance of probabilities, it's saying to you, as long as we can prove that there's some form of advantage being done here, there's some form of inducement being done here, you now have to show us how it is not an inducement, how it is not an advantage. There's a presumption that from the time they can prove the advantage, essentially they've proved corruption. Those are some of the much needed tools, in my view, that separates this bill from just a piece of paper with words on it, and an actual tool that assists persons in actively pursuing acts of corruption. Now, Mr. President, as I indicated to you, I didn't intend to be on my feet for too long as it relates to this bill, but I do believe that it is important for bills like this that forms part of the suite of legislation towards the active pursuit of the eradication of corruption to be discussed robustly in this chamber. And I do commend all of the honorable senators who have spoken before me for adequately addressing this bill in its entirety, and most importantly, supporting it. Most importantly, supporting it, because this is one of the major steps we need to cross in order for us to get Barbados on the right path towards eradicating, or at least managing, the acts of corruption in this country. And with those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Sands. Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I wish to thank all of the honorable senators who have spoken throughout the course of today. It was my expectation, Mr. President, that this particular bill would have attracted the kind of interest, commentary that all of all of my colleague senators have offered, because it is such a national issue. It is such an important and a critical national issue, and I am certain that all of us are committed to ensuring that in each of our spheres of influence, that we do our part to stamp out corruption where it exists. I want to begin, Mr. President, by going through the comments that have been made so far and to respond to some of the queries that have been made very briefly. I start, first of all, with Senator Franklin, and I only want to speak to one specific element raised by Senator Franklin, and I would wish to draw the attention of the Honorable Chamber to documents which are available on Parliament's own website under reports. There is a document entitled Report of the Judicial Appointments Committee, which exists in this Parliament. And with your leave, Mr. President, I would wish to read very briefly from that document. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, President. In the introduction of the document, Mr. President, it says, when Barbados became an independent nation within the Commonwealth on the 30th of November 1966, provision was made in the Constitution for puisne judges to be appointed by the Judicial and Legal Services Commission following its predecessor established in 1956. This is how far back it went. However, on 27th of August 1974, the Constitution was amended, and the original method of appointment was changed to remove the JLSC from the judicial appointments process and to give the Prime Minister a direct recommendatory role in the appointment of judges. It goes on, Mr. President, at paragraph 3 to say Section 81 has proven to be controversial. Some commentators are of the opinion that the involvement of the Prime Minister in the appointments process opened a door for the entry of political patronage into the judiciary and had the potential to compromise the independence of the judiciary and blur the separation of powers. Mr. President, I want to fast track through the commentary that is contained in the report and go directly to paragraph 7, which takes us all the way from 1974 to 2019 under this administration, Mr. President, where the government of Barbados, and it says in the report, radically changed the method of appointing judges by joining the movement toward greater transparency in the process of judicial appointments. It said Parliament passed the Supreme Court of Judicature Amendment Act of 2019, Section 93A1 of the Amending Act created a Judicial Appointments Committee which shall be responsible for making recommendations to the Prime Minister in respect of persons to be appointed to any vacancy in the Supreme Court and for the purposes of the Constitution at Section 81. It went on, Mr. President, to identify the process of an advertisement of vacancies, the constitution of the committee, who then reviews those vacancies and makes the recommendations. And this, Mr. President, in 2019 was a response to a 1974 claim of political interference at the level of the Prime Minister. And so on that basis, Mr. President, it would be erroneous, in fact, to assert that the Prime Minister did the opposite of that which the documents of this very chamber, this very Parliament, says the very opposite of, and I would not wish the public to be so misled. I move on, Mr. President.
Point of order, Mr. President. I hate to interrupt the good senator, but she's misleading the House. I commended the Prime Minister and I said she gave up that power by appointing a Judicial Appointments Committee. So she's saying the same thing I'm saying, but she's criticizing me for saying it. You know, I commended the Prime Minister. I said she gave up the power that she had, that the Prime Minister took in 1974. Mr. President, you must remember that.
Indeed. Thank you for that clarification, Senator. And thank you for your commendation.
Thank you very much, Senator Franklin. It is a rare occasion when we agree with each other on the same day.
I therefore understand your thought.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move on to the comments made by Senator Boyce. Senator Boyce, in his great detailed and usual legal luminary way, went into extensive detail on the importance of strengthening the bill, and there is nothing that I could have, could we have could we have some order in the chamber, Mr. President?
I'm not hearing any disturbances. I'm hearing you clearly, Senator Governor.
So Senator Boyce, he spoke obviously about the need for strengthening of the legislation, and I don't think that that is anything that any of us would disagree with. But I would continue to draw to the attention of the Honourable Chamber the suite of legislation which went before, the suite of legislation which is still to come, and the efforts that all of us must play in their enforcement. Mr. President, I, of course, can never follow after Senator Greenidge. Senator Greenidge always, in his usual way, gives great insights with the kind of careful and detailed attention that he is well known for, and I wish to associate myself with his comments. Now, the Senators Hunt, Moe, and Rogers came afterwards, and I wish to deal specifically with one issue raised by the Honourable Senator with regard to whistleblowing legislation. Mr. President, at Article 33 of the United Nations Convention on Corruption, there is a specific call for whistleblower protection. And so Barbados is in fact obligated, as we domesticate this legislation into our law, to do just that. But I would wish to remind the Honourable Chamber that under the umbrella of the Joint Select Committee on Integrity and Public Life, in that bill, when that bill was originally drafted and sent to Select Committee, in the context of that legislation, there was a dedicated section included there on whistleblowing. In the course of submissions from entities like the Bar Association, the Integrity Group of Barbados, and others, it was felt that the combination of their inputs, the call for integrity legislation, and the requirements of the Convention on Corruption, that whistleblowing protection needed to stand alone. And it was on that basis, Mr. President, that the Honourable Attorney General, in his own presentation on this bill in the other place, spoke specifically and gave the assurance to the country that whistleblowing legislation will be before the Honourable Chamber in the other place. I believe he gave an indication also of timing, which is expected to be next month. So it is a clear commitment on the part of the government of Barbados not to treat to the question of whistleblowing in a tangential way to either integrity and public life legislation or in the Corruption Convention, but to have it stand on its own, as is called for in Article 33 of the legislation. Now, Mr. President, I know that quite a bit has been made of vaccines, and I'm not in a position to go into that at all, but I would wish to draw the attention of the Honourable Chamber to the parliamentary statement on vaccines, which was laid also in the other place on September 19, outlining the details of that transaction and the dates and the parties associated with that transaction. So if there is a need for further clarity, I would recommend that we go directly to the documents of the House. Now, Mr. President, I want to close my comments by speaking to the softer things of corruption. The perception of corruption raised by Senator Moe. Absolutely. Mr. President, I said in my opening remarks that there are many people who came to public life with assets that they could not afford while in public life. There are many people who, as they walk the streets of Barbados, serving a nation to which they are committed, they came to office from private sector jobs, development agency jobs, where their earnings and their benefits were significantly greater than those that they are able to glean here. But they serve because they're committed, Mr. President, and it is a challenge. I say this here, to have your character impugned with careless and sometimes inflammatory statements by people who don't know you, who don't know where you came from, who don't know what you earned and how you got what you got before you came to public life. There are many who you would think that they assume that you suddenly woke up one morning and dropped from a different planet and manifested in public life today at this stage of your life, and you never owned anything before. How is that possible, Mr. President? There's something about the softer side, about the perception of corruption, that each of us have a responsibility to pay attention to. Our words, even in this chamber at times, are careless, they are inflammatory, and at times our actions are hurtful, not just to the people who step forward in public life, but to our families. There are people who, when we go home on any given night, our families remind us they did not sign up for this. They say this all the time, Mr. President. We've talked about it in this very chamber. We subject people to public ridicule with careless actions that have long-lasting damage. And we call it whatever we want to call it to justify our poor behavior. But it causes damage. And so when we talk about things like whistleblowing, when we talk about investigations of corruption, there's a reason why the threshold for investigation and evidence is set so high, especially in a small environment with 166 square miles, where someone with a phone and a lot of time on their hands can create anything, and that which is repeated or circulated often. Careless, inflammatory statements oftentimes become true. We muddy the waters when we're talking about the evidence collection and whistleblowing for things like corruption, because we have so tainted the minds of people sometimes with all the conspiracy theories and the ugly commentary that we put out there, that people sometimes don't know who to trust, what to believe, what is real and what is not. I'm calling on every member of this chamber on the softer issues relating to corruption to be more responsible, to be more accountable, to practice the integrity of which we speak, to do better, even in this house, Mr. President. Because corruption is not just the big things, it's the small things, and it is very much rooted in perception. False or accurate perception matters. People must matter. And if people are wrong, if they have done the wrong things, if they have benefited from corruption, well, let us hold them accountable. But let us also stop dragging people through the mud because it seems almost like a sport in this country for us to do it. It has to stop, Mr. President, because otherwise, when we look at this thing like declaration of assets and putting these things away, someone spoke about blind trust and so on. Mr. President, do you know how difficult it is? I am the mother of a 22-year-old. I spend a lot of time with young people as a result. I know in this own Barbados Labour Party that there are amazing young people. But when they listen to some of the inflammatory commentary and the things that persons who have stepped forward to serve in public life are asked to be subjected to, they say, not me. When we want people to serve as chairmen of boards, and we want them to show everything that they have ever had. They had their husbands, their wives, their children, their aunt, the dog, and the cat. But we don't want to have even the anonymity of saying, this is a blind trust and these are your total assets. How do we get quality people in this country to come forward to say, yes, I am willing to serve, when we cast them under the spectre of a corrupt individual once you step forward? There is something that has to change, and it is in our minds, it is in our speech, it is in our actions, it is in our language. It is not just in this legislation, Mr. President. It is not just in the enforcement of this legislation. It is not just in the commission that has been created to enforce it, neither is it in our Royal Barbados Police Force on its own. A lot of the commitment to stamping out corruption and the perception of corruption and being just in treating to those issues for those, and distinguishing between those whose integrity is intact and they have nothing to be ashamed of, and those who should be called before a corruption commission. There has to be a distinguisher, and we have to be able to support this. And with these few words, Mr. President, I commend this legislation to this House, I commend this bill to this House, and I'm looking forward to being a part of the future bills that I have already spoken about, made public by the Honorable Attorney General and the Honorable in the other place. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Please the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and the Honorable Senate dissolves itself into committee for the further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Honorable Senate resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
You ready, President? You ready? The Senate is now in committee.
Mr. Chairman, we will call in parts and clauses. Part 1, clauses 1 to 3.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 1, clauses 1, 2, and 3 do stand part.
The question is that Part 1, clauses 1 to 3 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 4 to 13.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 4 to 13 do stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 4 to 13 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 14 to 16.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 3 stand part, clauses 14 through 16.
To 16. The
Through
question is that Part 3, clauses 14 to 16 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 17 to 19.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 4, clauses 17 through 19 stand part.
The question is that Part 4, clauses 17 to 19 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 20 to 24.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 5, clauses 20 to 24 stand part.
The question is that Part 5, clauses 20 to 24 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
The question is that the schedule be the schedule to the bill. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be entitled an act to provide and be cited as an act to provide for the prevention, investigation, and prosecution of acts of corruption.
The question is that this bill,
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as a Prevention of Corruption Act 2021.
the question is that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Prevention of Corruption Act 2021. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now so passed and so cited.
Order number 3, sir.
Order number 3.
In the name of the
And what do you raise, Senator Frank?
Mr. President, I wish to point out to you, and also to the members of the Senate, because I would have given you advance notice of my intention to raise a matter of privilege.
Upon privilege. What is the point of privilege?
Sir, last time we were assembled as the Senate, some incidents occurred. Some people were not pleased by my behavior, and that is, I have no problem with that, because no, not yet. When, however, sir, I left the Senate chamber, and during the night I went home, and I received a WhatsApp message. It contained a posting, I don't know what you call it, that Senator Haynes made on Twitter. The person said to me, they sent the post and they said that it has posted a photo of her ballot, and he suggested that it should void the election. I don't agree with that, but then I read on further, and it showed clearly that Senator Haynes had posted her ballot, her secret ballot, on Twitter. So that has, no, secret means something, but that has profound implications for how we behave and how we conduct business in here. That would tend to offend the dignity of this honorable place. All right. And I have never posted any proceedings in this place, so I don't know how it could be blocking this one. Maybe blocking I've got other block on me, but certainly not posting secret documents from this place. That would tend to bring the Senate into disrepute. And last and least of all, it called an honorable member of this place dishonest. I am not seeking to have that address here, that part, because I've already taken legal advice on it. But I'm more concerned about the conduct where you would post secret documents from this place in a public forum. You know, and these days with all the technology where everybody is quick to jump on Twitter and Instagram and all these other Snapchats and all these things, TikTok. I'm learning a few of them. I'm only on one, WhatsApp. And I think it's something that the younger people tend to gravitate to. And it might be a case of youthful exuberance. But when you are in this place, you have to temper that youthful exuberance. I still have some of that youthful exuberance myself. So, so I can understand a person of that tender age having youthful exuberance. But you must temper that youthful exuberance with who and what you are. You know, the knowledge of who and what you are. You cannot come to this place and bring the dignity of this chamber into question in this manner. So, sir, I'm asking that the matter be referred to the Committee on Privileges for an investigation into the conduct of Senator Haynes. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you for that motion, and in accordance with Section 25(3) of the standing orders, we move a motion to have the matter investigated, and it would therefore be referred to the Committee of Privileges for such investigation based on the facts as laid up by you. Senator Haynes, what do you raise?
Mr. President, I too rise on a point of privilege.
Point of privilege.
I hope that I can be heard clearly with my mask on. I rise this evening on a point of privilege in a moment that is steeped in irony, as a member who bordered on contempt just a week ago seeks to have my conduct examined by the Committee of Privileges. I'm standing this evening to have the Leader of Opposition Business's conduct examined by the Committee of Privileges, specifically as it relates to remarks given to a prominent online media platform just a week ago, remarks given live, as he spoke about my youthful exuberance in using Twitter. Those remarks were made after the vote had been made and after I was at home. Those remarks were given live even as the historic sitting of both houses was underway. On Wednesday, October 20th, 2021, the following statement was given to the media by Senator Franklin. I quote, "The ballot papers only got a place to vote yes. There's no no. There's no place to put no on the ballot paper." I found these remarks deeply troubling, as myself and all members who were present for the historic election of our first president are aware that this account was questionable, as a ballot paper simply had a space for placing a mark and verbal instructions followed on how the vote was to be conducted. My concern is rooted in the fact that Senator Franklin's comments, which were questionable, cast the day's proceedings in an overwhelmingly negative light, causing the general public to doubt the integrity of the election of our first president. By extension, his comments brought into question the integrity of the members who would have participated in that electoral process. My decision to publish my ballot occurred as there were public requests by other young people who use the platform that I chose to share it on, questions being asked for clarity to be offered, because overwhelmingly, the idea was that something fishy happened during the course of the election. As far as I'm aware, there are no specific rules that govern this House, which would have been breached in the process of that being done. If there were indeed breaches, I welcome the opportunity that the Committee of Privileges will have to bring that to my attention, if indeed there were breaches. As it relates to the specific matter that I have raised, I appeal to the President to have Senator Franklin's statements in that specific media interview brought to the attention of the Committee of Privileges for their scrutiny. I further request that the Honorable Leader of Opposition Business in the Senate be asked to recuse himself from the Committee of Privileges, as he is a member of said committee. With regards to both the bill that the question of privilege that he raised, and as it relates to the one that I'm raising, as he is a subject of both matters. Mr. President, I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Haynes. Your motion is noted, and the two motions are noted, and And in accordance with Section 25(3) of the standing orders, in both cases, I find that there's a prima facie case and that the matters will be referred to the Committee of Privileges for their consideration. I thank you, Senator Franklin. Thank you, Senator Haynes, for raising these points of privilege. And just for the information, honorable senators who may be not as familiar with this section, no debate occurs at this time on these motions. The statements are made, motions are proposed, and they're referred. So, we'll now revert to government business, or continue government business. Again, as honorable senators will be aware, matters of privilege take precedence over other items except where there is a division in progress.
Order number 3, sir.
Order number 3.
In the name of the Honorable Minister of Science, Innovation and Smart Technology, to move the second reading of the Barbados National Honors and Decorations Bill 2021.
Senator McConney.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I rise to introduce the Barbados National Honors and Decorations Bill 2021, I do so, sir, fully aware of the fact that there are a number of transitions.
Senator Franklin, what do you raise?
Sir, it's again another matter of privilege because I was only privileged to see this bill today. You know, and I can't even think what the substance of the bill is because I got it on my email this morning. And I will have great difficulty to respond or to say anything on this bill because as I said, I only saw it this morning. I haven't read it yet. I was more concerned when I got here to be checking some legislation about what we were dealing with earlier today because I was seeing that I borrowed the law books from the clerk and I was trying to make sure what I was saying was absolutely correct. So I didn't even get a chance during that time to browse this bill. So, sir, it can't be fair to the opposition. It can't be fair to the opposition to introduce this bill without any notice whatsoever. And I would suggest that you use your power to protect the opposition from the abuse of the majority, because this can only be an abusive state where the government, because of its numbers, can railroad, and the only avenue I have for redress there would be to ask you to protect us from this behavior. So it's impossible. I have not read it. I got it this morning.
But I'm in the hands of the leader of the House in these matters. I don't control the agenda in that regard. What I do recall was that there was notice coming from the Office of the Clerk with the bill and related information given the urgent action taken on the matter by the House of Assembly yesterday. And I believe that the draft bill was circulated at the time when it was circulated to the House of Assembly for information. Last night there was a confirmation that there was an amendment to one of the clauses to do with consultation with the leader of the opposition. But the bill was circulated, I think a week ago, when it was circulated to the House. But I will be in the hands of the, excuse me one second. No, I'm advised, yes, it came to the House yesterday, and senators were so circulated. I believe that there is both a time and timing issue in relation to all of the honors that previously existed could not be transferred in their existing form, and therefore, in order to be able to meet the honors for this coming independence, there would be the need for the legislation to facilitate that process. But I'm in the hands of the leader of government business.
Mr. President.
Mike, please.
I would simply ask that the sitting be suspended for 10 minutes. Thank you.
The question is that this sitting be suspended until 5 minutes after 6 o'clock. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This sitting stands suspended for 10 minutes until 5 minutes after 6 o'clock. This sitting is resumed. Just one small procedural matter. Clerk has advised that we should technically have a seconder for those motions. So, Senator, motion moved by Senator Franklin, seconded.
Sir, I move to second the motion.
Thank you very much, Senator Crystal Drakes. Motions moved by Senator Crystal Haynes.
I'm going to second it.
I recognize Senator Adams. But I was looking that way, so. It's who catches the eye. Sorry about that, but it's just there are many persons available. I was looking that way. Thank you very much, senators, for that. So the procedure is all completed. We continue order number 3.
Mr. President, in the name of the Honorable Minister of Science, Innovation, and Smart Technology, to move the second reading of the Barbados National Honors and Decorations Bill 2021.
Mr. President,
Senator Franklin.
I have spoken with the leader of government business, and he's an honorable man, and he assures me that better could be done. And basically, there's no harm but result from passage of this bill in the form that it's taken. And so I will therefore withdraw my objection to be passed, to be dealt with now. I'm assured that he's only dealing with like changing things from Crown to whatever else you have. So I wouldn't want to get into government's way with something like this, especially when I understand Senator Walker's going to get an honor.
I thank you for your spirit of accommodation. Thank you very much. Senator McConney.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, as I rise to introduce the Barbados National Honors and Decorations Bill 2021, I do so, sir, with an understanding that there are a number of transitions that have to be made as Barbados moves towards becoming a republic. And these transitions, in many cases, sir, will require for us to set up our own independent systems. And when I say independent systems, I mean separate from some of those systems that had to receive an order or some other type of special letters patent or some other type of permission to be conferred here in Barbados. And we are intending, sir, that we can transition our honors and our decorations to a system that allows the Parliament of Barbados to have that authority as opposed to the prerogative of the Queen or the monarch in this situation. Now, among the many transitions, sir, as I mentioned, would be our honors and decorations here in this country. Currently, that system that we have here, it recognizes Barbadians and non-Barbadians as well too, sir, for some achievements, for meritorious service, for long service, for courage and bravery, for achievements, for humanitarian work, for community work, and so we have a breadth of reasons for which persons may be honored here in Barbados. Currently, sir, the authority for Barbados' national honors and decorations, they are set out in 2 different streams. One is the letters patent or letters patent, depending on how we pronounced it. I like letters patent. And then the second one is by our local statutes, individual statutes that establish those orders. Now, letters patent, sir, were established 1980. It established the Order of Barbados. And you will, sir, if I may say and simplify it, the letters patent, and I have just lost my place. Give me a chance, sir, to regain. Yes. Sir, the letters patent really is, it is a written order. It's a written order by a monarch giving Barbados permission to award certain honors and decorations. Our national statutes, sir, as I mentioned, are our individual laws that were passed. So, sir, I'm sure that under the letters patent or letters patent, you would recall that there were a number of honors that we would give. There was the Knight and Dame of St. Andrew, sir. That is where people would be called sir or dame once they have been suitably knighted by the Governor General. We had the Companion of Honor, sir. That was also an award that is associated with the Companion, associated with our British Empire. There was also, sir, the Crown of Merit, again associated with the monarch, and that was in 2 grades, our gold and silver. You will recall, sir, there was also the Barbados Service Award in two grades, which was the Service Star and the Service Medal. And you would recall, sir, too, that we had our bravery decorations. We had 2. Gallantry, that's one where you practically put your life at risk. And then you had bravery, which was courageous acts in hazardous situations. And then, of course, sir, you had your Barbados Services Medal of Honor, which was to most of the protective services, the fire and the police and the prison, etc. So those are the awards, the honors that were established under the letters patent as it stood. Now, sir, as we transition, we have a different landscape of what Barbados's national awards would look like. And I just want to share what that new landscape would look like, and I'm quickly going to, and it is included in this bill, sir, in the schedules that go, I believe, from 1 to 6 or 1 to 5 of this particular bill. We have laid out the specifics that relate to each of these different bills that are established by order, the Order of Barbados in this bill. But additionally, sir, the landscape is made up of other honors that fall on the different pieces of legislation. And so if you would walk with me, sir, you and the chamber, through the number of honors now that will continue. First, you would have heard me mention earlier that we had the Knight of and Dame of St. Andrew. That will now be discontinued. And you will recall, sir, that the Order of the Freedom of Barbados was established under the Order of Freedom of Barbados Act 2019, and that particular honor, sir, which carries the title the most honorable, was in the order of preference set at the same level of the Knight and the Dame of St. Andrew. But even before that, sir, first in the order of preference, that is second in the order of precedence, I should say. And when we talk about the order of precedence, we're talking about the protocol that determines which is more important than the other and how they are to be treated ceremonially according to the correct protocols and courtesies, privileges. So Barbados's top honor now, sir, would remain the Order of National Hero. And that was established in 1988, sir. And it is awarded to persons who have given outstanding service in Barbados, and his or her contribution has altered the course of history of Barbados, has given service to Barbados which has been exemplified by visionary and pioneering leadership, extraordinary achievement, and the attainment of the highest excellence, which has redounded to the honor of Barbados, or has, through heroic exploits and sacrifice, contributed to the improvement of the economic and social conditions of Barbados and Barbadians generally. And it carries the title, the Right Excellent. So that will be the very highest honor. As I said, the second highest honor would be the Order of the Freedom of Barbados, equates to that of the knighthood. The next order, and I must add, sir, that the Order of the Freedom of Barbados is an honor that will be conferred on each president of Barbados, each future president of Barbados, at the commencement of his or her term in office. There is then a third award, sir, It is called the award of the gold. It is called the Gold Award of Achievement, which falls under the Gold Award of Achievement Act, which came into effect in April of 2001. We also have, sir, the award of Barbadian Humanitarian Service, the Barbadian Humanitarian Service Award. Again, that falls under the Barbados Humanitarian Service Award Act of 2020. We have also, sir, the Pride of Barbados, which falls under the award of the Pride of Barbados Act 2019. I mentioned those, sir, because those are the ones that have been established by other statutes that will remain a part of the honors landscape of Barbados. Now to those, sir, that are now being either transferred or established under the Order of Barbados, which is addressed in this bill. One, what was once called the Companion of Honor will now be called the Order of the Republic. That, sir, the qualifications for that will be very similar to that of the Companion of Honor. Sir, there were certain limitations to that was under the letters patent or letters patent, and we as Barbadians believe that that restriction was somewhat limited, and we have now expanded that. And if I may share with you and this chamber, not more than 5 persons now may be appointed upon the coming into force of this act, once we pass it here, of course, sir. No more than 5 persons may be appointed to the Order of the Republic upon the coming into effect of this act, but no more than 50 persons holding appointments as the Order of the Republic shall be given in any, not including, of course, honorary members, no more than 50 shall be given in any given year. And the recipient, as I mentioned, shall go by the title, the Honorable. That is for those who would be so privileged as to earn the Order of the Republic. What was under the old letters patent? The Gold Crown of Merit or the Silver Crown of Merit. In this new Order of Barbados covered by this bill, of course, the crown is associated with the monarch, and as we make the transition to republic, we want to shift that to the Trident of Excellence. And again, there will be 2 grades for that: the Gold Trident of Excellence and the Silver Trident of Excellence. As I mentioned, the qualifications for that would be very similar to those of the Gold and Silver Crown of Merit. In this instance, sir, not more than 5 persons, of course, other than honorary members. And when I talk about honorary members, those are people who are non-Barbadian. So not more than 5 persons may have, may be conferred with the Trident of Excellence in each of the 2 grades. So no more than 5 for the Trident of Excellence, gold, and no more than 5 for the Trident of Excellence, silver. And the recipients will be allowed to use the letters G, T, E for Gold Trident of Excellence, or STE, the Silver Trident of Excellence, after their names. Sir, again, established as part of this Order of Barbados in this bill is our Barbados Service Award. And I pronounce that differently because the next award has a slight variation on that. The Barbados Service Award, sir, is the same as before. The title is the same as before. The requirements and the qualifications are very much similar to those of before, and that has 2 different grades. It is the Barbados Service Star and the Barbados Service Medal. And these are awarded for meritorious work in the various fields of endeavor, civil and others at this point in time. Not more than 7 persons may be conferred the Barbados Service Awards in each of the 2 grades. So no more than 7 in the Barbados Service Star and no more than 7 for the Barbados Service Medal. And sir, the other one is the Barbados Services Medal of Honor. And that, sir, again, we had that before. We will now bring it over into this Order of Barbados, so that does not change, with similar types of qualifications. Eligible for that particular Barbados Services Medal of Honor would be members of the Barbados Defense Force, the Barbados Police Service, the Barbados Fire Service, the Barbados Prison. Those are mostly the protective services. And the recipient would have to be over 18 years old, of course, with exemplary conduct and over 15 years service in either one or a combination of those particular services I just mentioned. Additionally, once they have received that honor, they may then receive a clasp for additional years, for 25 to 30 years of service, for 30 to 35 years of service, and then for over 35 years of service. And then, of course, sir, we have the Barbados Bravery Decorations. Again, they came over from the letters patent. They will remain very similar in terms of qualifications for that. These bravery decorations have two. There is the Barbados Star of Gallantry and the Barbados Bravery Medal. The differentiation between the two is, one, you practically have to put your life at risk for the gallantry. And then, of course, the bravery has very specific circumstances around hazardous circumstances in which you would have performed that act. And finally, sir, in this current order covered by this bill is the Prime Minister's Leadership Award. And this is an award that recognizes the head boy and the head girl in schools in recognition of their attainment of leadership. And we know that leadership, we want to encourage that all of those qualities and attributes of leaders in our young people. And we have learned that certainly recognition goes a long way in terms of motivating and encouraging people to be able to aspire and to be able to do better in the positions of leadership. Sir, other changes that are represented in this National Honors and Decorations Bill include the fact that there was a time when only a single individual could receive an award. We are now at a point where groups or teams will be able to receive this award. We are in an age of collaboration. We are in an age where teams work together, and sometimes it is not just one person who would have achieved, but it is a group of people or a team of people. So that is a significant change as we now put this order into place. Nomination for any of these awards can be done. You can nominate any citizen of Barbados for appointment to the order, which is the Order of Barbados, or a person other than a citizen of Barbados for appointment as an honorary member of the Order of Barbados, which is again similar to some of the facility that we have in our current honors. And of course, each of the honors will describe what it is and specify who can qualify. Now, there are those who have asked about the legacy. So for those persons who have awards that would have been conferred before November 30th of 2021, these would be your sirs and your dames. They will continue to keep those titles. They will continue to have the respect and the courtesies and the privileges of protocol that go with them. So we are not taking anything away from anyone. We are continuing to celebrate and indeed to recognize those honors with all of the full privileges that so attend. Some people have asked whether or not the particular award they have is going to be converted to something new. No. If you had the Companion of Honor, it remains the Companion of Honor. Because then the Order of the Republic would only come into effect after November 30th of this year. So therefore, if it was no, it will not be converted and renamed something. No, you will not be reassigned to something else. You keep whatever you had before with all that attached to it, and then it is then after the 30th of November that you will then get those new awards that are a part, or newly named awards that are part of the Order of Barbados. There were questions also, sir, raised about what happens when you nominate. I will say that over the last 3 years since 2018, we have been having those nominations electronically, and it is our intention that the platform will now be up again for those nominations to be done online. We are currently working on that as fast as possible to make sure that the new names with the new descriptions and all of the new requirements are up there so that you can then make those nominations online over the next couple of weeks. And I believe that the Government Information Service will provide the information to the public at the appropriate time and in the appropriate way. What we really want to encourage you to do is to please nominate those people or groups whom you believe ought to receive. And again, we want to reiterate, I know because I have served on the Advisory Council in the past and will likely continue to do so at this time. And what has often happened is that people will call after and say, well, why did you not recommend so? And the truth is, if it did not come in as a nomination, it cannot be considered by the council. The council can't just make up who should be considered. It has to come in as part of the nomination process. And then we are able to view those nominations. And as you can see, there are certain areas in which there are only certain number that we can issue in any given year. And it would mean, therefore, that maybe not every single person that gets nominated, as deserving as they are, if you only can issue so many, we will simply have to consider what are the best applications at that given time. So I'm encouraging you, we have a very short period of time. Get your people together, get the information together. And one of the things I also want to share in those nominations that we have seen, sometimes people give information that is irrelevant to the particular award the person is given. Speak to the person's achievement or their merit or their service in those areas where it is given, as opposed to their children and their parents and the neighborhood where they grew up and where they went to high school. And these are, and so I want, now that we have a short period of time, appeal to you to look at what the qualifications are, and when you send your nominations in, make sure that what you have put there is relevant to the particular, because what it does, you will make a very good candidate not look so good against the others if indeed you have failed to honor that aspect of what is required. Sir, the terms of reference of the Republican Status Transition Advisory Committee, which is that committee that has been advising Barbados as we make the transition into Republican status, they have indeed reviewed this particular, all of the recommendations that would have caused this act to be drafted, and they have given their approval. And in fact, there was also a cabinet committee of persons familiar with honors and decorations and protocols who were in fact part of the process even prior to the Republican Status Transition Advisory Committee getting involved. And therefore, so it has been a long process, it has been a considered process, and much thought has gone into making this transition at this stage. And it is with these few words that I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Yes. Thank you very much, Senator McConney. Any other speakers? There being none, Senator McConney.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair.
Second time.
Sorry?
Okay. Oh, yes, you did it, sorry.
Yes, Mr.
There's
President.
no custom, other person speaking. Yeah, the question is that this bill be read a second time. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and the Honorable Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
You know you orchestrating something. You want to tell people about that. I know you know.
You want this? You want the app? I was telling you they had one there. You ready? The Senate is now in committee.
Mr. Chairman, we will also call this bill in part and clauses. Part 1, clauses 1 to 3.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 1, clauses 1 to 3 stand part.
The question is that Part 1, clauses 1 to 3 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 4 to 21.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 4 to 21 stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 4 to 21 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 22 and 23.
22?
22 and 23.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 3, clauses 22 and 23 stand part.
The question is that Part 3, clauses 22 and 23 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 24 to 27.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 4, clauses 24 to 27 stand part.
The question is that Part 4, clauses 24 to 27 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
First schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
The question is that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Second schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
The question is that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Third schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill.
The question is that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Fourth schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Fifth schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the fifth schedule be the fifth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the fifth schedule be the fifth schedule to the bill. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
And sixth schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the sixth schedule be the sixth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the sixth schedule be the sixth schedule to the bill. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that this bill be now read a third time. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Honorable senators against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Barbados National Honors and Decorations Bill Act 2021.
The question is that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Barbados National Honors and Decorations Act 2021. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited. Senator McConney.
Mr. President, this concludes the business of the government, and I beg to move that this sitting be adjourned sine die.
The question is that this sitting do now adjourn sine die. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This sitting stands adjourned.